of power.
Growing up in a glass bowl with chameleons, lizards, and tadpoles, it hardly enters your mind that there's something better than this. I let her sleep in a carrot, maybe a seed from the parrot. Believe me when I tell you the word gourmet just don't exist. But piece of power, a flying saucer food delight. Piece of power, oh that's what makes us feel alright.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, to be honest, I never really watched the cartoon a whole lot. I grew up more with the movies, which, with the exception of the third movie, were pretty damn awesome. I enjoy watching them to this day, and it constantly reminds me of the good days of my childhood. Now, the Turtles have seen their share of games, particularly with the NES, but the one I'm going to review is none other than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4 Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo, considered one of the best beat-em-up games of all time. The game is based off the arcade game of the same name, which pits our heroes going against Shredder after Krang takes off with the Statue of Liberty. What he planned on doing with it is beyond me, and it's never explained why he took it in the first place, but hey, anything that lets the Turtles beat the everlasting shit out of things is good enough for me. Of course, you can select one of the 4 Turtles, such as Leonardo, the most balanced of the bunch, Michelangelo, who hits hard but has slow combos, Donatello, who has the longest reach but slowest walking speed, and finally Raphael, who has the shortest range but is incredibly fast and my personal favorite. You have an attack button which you can use to chain together attacks and deliver some of the most satisfying ass whooping you have ever experienced, and you have a jump button allowing you to dodge just about any projectile thrown at you. And that's it. Yes, besides the D-pad, you really only use 2 buttons on the entire controller. Some would call it simplicity, others would call it laziness. You can also perform mid-air attacks, which differ depending on how long you wait to perform the attack in mid-air. You also have a dash attack, which you can execute by hitting the attack button while dashing, which you can set to have your turtle do automatically, or by double tapping left or right if you have dash set to manual in the options screen. Finally, you also have a special attack, which you can perform by pressing the jump and attack button at the same time. It's a hard-hitting attack, but it costs some of your life when you connect with it. I'd recommend saving it for the bosses. Speaking of bosses, the game offers plenty of them. You'll face longtime villains such as Baxter Stockman, Metalhead, the Rat King, and many others as you progress through each stage. By the way, I love how just about every single boss explodes after defeating them. It would make sense for enemies such as Metalhead and Rat King's toy to explode, but why does Slash blow up? Regular enemies come in different flavors as well. There's many different foot soldiers which each come with a different weapon, stone warriors which are a little harder to kill but fun to beat regardless, roadkill Rodneys who are definitely my least favorite enemy in the game as they can be pretty annoying, and finally Mousers, definitely the easiest enemy in the game. You bitch. There's a total of 10 stages, each taking the turtles in different locations front and back through time. You'll stroll across alleyways, prehistoric caves, a pirate ship, a running train, and other areas with foot soldiers waiting to die. I cannot tell you how many times I've beaten and played this game, it's that fun. The controls are spot on, the sense of humor, while cheesy at times, can be pretty charming, and when you got a buddy or a brother to join you along, the game just becomes even greater. You can beat the shit out of bosses, be a jerk and hog up all the pizza, and use the power-ups prematurely to piss your partner off. Finally, the music is kick-ass. This is definitely my favorite TMNT soundtrack of all time. The upbeat rhythms and all-around catchiness fits the setting perfectly, and while technically the SNES soundtrack doesn't match up the original arcade sound, it still sounds fantastic. But the SNES wasn't the only system to attain turtle greatness. There was also a game for the Sega Genesis. Take it away, Elliot.
Like John said, the Sega Genesis also received a game known as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles The Hyperstone Heist. The plot is pretty much the same, minus the time traveling, and instead of Shredder taking the Statue of Liberty, he uses the Hyperstone to take Manhattan entirely, and then threatens to use it to conquer the entire world, and...
Holy hell, could you have made Shredder any more muscular? It looks like his shirt is painted on for Christ's sakes. And why is his body so ripped but his finger looks so pudgy?
Anyway, because it's slightly based on Turtles in Time, gameplay is exactly as the same as the SNES counterpart. The only real difference is that the dash now has its own button, which is definitely a welcome addition because performing the dash on the Super Nintendo felt a little more awkward. The color palette is also a bit richer. The Turtles definitely look a bit more vibrant in this version. The speed of the gameplay is also slightly faster, so if you're into fast-paced turtle action, then Hyperstone Heist is your game. Musically speaking, it's all the music from the arcade game, and even with the Genesis sound chip, it still sounds spectacular. In fact, some will say that the Genesis soundtrack is a bit more faithful to the arcade game more than the SNES version. There aren't as many bosses in this version. It does have its exclusives like a human Baxter Stockman and Tatsu from the first and second movie, not to mention the level called the Gauntlet, which is a special boss rush level exclusive to this game. But I can't help but feel they could have added more bosses instead of having to fight color swaps of previous bosses. And why play in Rocksteady but not Bebop? In terms of stages, Hyperstone Heist has only about half the levels from the SNES counterpart, but the levels are certainly a lot longer, which kinda makes up for it. But even with longer stages, the game is incredibly short. beatable in less than an hour, and even less time when you have a buddy to tag along with.
Yeah, the SNES version is also pretty short as well. I think I forgot to mention that. Overall, both games are simply a blast to play. If you got a Super Nintendo, then do yourself a favor and get Turtles in Time.
Or if you got a Genesis, get the Hyperstone Heist. Both games are very fun and well worth your time. By the way, watch the movies. We're promoting them except the third one.
Piece of power, a